Here's a man bites dog headline for you. Largest U.S. teachers union calls for Education Secretary Duncan to resign. That's the NEA, the National Education Association. At its national convention, its members called out Arne Duncan, President Obama's head of the Department of Education, asking for his resignation. What makes the move so unusual is teacher unions and Democrats tend to be natural allies. The two teachers unions, the National Education Association and the smaller American Federation of Teachers, they spend time and money backing Democratic candidates and supporting them while they're in office. The unions and Democratic leaders have family squabbles about education policies now and then, but calling for the resignation of Obama's education agency head isn't a family squabble. That's a major rejection of Obama's education agenda. Here's another telling headline out of the convention. NEA launches campaign to end toxic testing. That was the term they used, toxic testing. That's another shot across the bow. The Obama administration has continued the regimen of yearly high-stakes tests that the Bush administration began with No Child Left Behind. It's even upped the ante with the high-stakes testing on steroids that come with the new Common Core standards. The NEA is saying to President Obama in no uncertain terms, the obsession with high-stakes testing, the testing your administration supports, is toxic. Okay, here's one final headline. Teachers' unions turn against Democrats. Well, that may be a bit of an overstatement, but the fact is that teachers' unions, along with many teachers and a number of progressive Democrats, and I count myself among them, are drawing a bright line separating themselves from a number of education policies supported by Obama and other prominent Democratic officials. So what's going on? The answer is long and complex. Books have been written on the subject, but the short and simple answer is too many Democratic leaders have bought into large chunks of the conservative education agenda, and many of us who usually support Democrats and Democratic policies object strongly. Follow this path and we could end up deprofessionalizing the teaching profession and dismantling our system of public education, which, for all its flaws, is one of this country's major accomplishments. Up to this point, the NEA has tried to make nice to soften its level of disagreement with the Obama administration, but now the stakes are too high. The gloves are off. I could go into a dozen different directions explaining the motivations of the various actors in the conservative education reform movement. I could talk about the profit motive behind their agenda. I could talk about the desire to lower taxes on the rich and defund programs helping the poor. I could talk about the hatred of labor unions and on. But instead, I want to look at the underlying assumption of the conservative side of the education debate, the basic notion that leads to their agenda, and the one I think is so seductive to so many Democratic leaders who reject most other conservative proposal. Here's the basic notion. It's very simple. Bad schools are the problem, and great schools are the solution. Spun out a bit, it goes like this. The reason our children don't read, write, and compute as well as they should is the schools are doing a lousy job teaching them. We've got failing schools filled with failing teachers, and that's why our children aren't learning. So, all we have to do is create great schools filled with great teachers. Voila! That's it, problem solved. The only question left is, how do we do it? The simple answers roll easily off the tongues of conservative education reformers. You create a bunch of new schools outside of our failed education system that know how to teach kids. That's charter schools. Check. You use taxpayer money to send kids to private schools. That's vouchers. Check. You figure out a way to label good teachers and bad teachers, good schools and bad schools. That's yearly high-stakes testing. Check. Then you fire the bad teachers, close the bad schools, and replace them with great teachers. Training and credentials are optional. And great charter schools and private schools. Check, check, and check. Well, that whole scenario is filled with wrong-headed assumptions, starting with its basic assumption that our public schools are miserable failures which are beyond saving. That's demonstrably false. It's a myth we've debunked here, and it's been debunked by education scholars again and again. Just because billions of dollars, literally billions of dollars, have been spent by conservatives since the 1980s to perpetuate this myth does not make it so. The second assumption, the second myth, is that there's an education magic wand you can wave and create these great schools out of nowhere. Sorry, folks, that magic wand doesn't exist. Charter schools and private schools don't outperform traditional public schools, no matter how hard their performers say they do. All types of schools, traditional, charter, private, they all have their share of successes and failures. And those rare great schools, which are held up as examples of what we should be doing everywhere, when you look carefully at them, you find their successes tend to be overhyped. And even those modest successes are difficult to reproduce elsewhere. Here's the more difficult truth, the one the education reformers and privatizers want to ignore, the one that doesn't have seductively easy answers. Student success in schools is a complex mixture of what goes on inside the school and outside the school. The single factor that has the greatest impact on school achievement isn't the schools they attend. It's the children's socioeconomic status. Children from high-income families tend to do very well in school, and achievement levels move downward from there. That's true in this country. It's true around the world. Education, schools, they're only part of the picture. Their success is dependent on the quality of life of the children and their lives outside of school. We need to constantly work on improving our schools, to improve the teaching and the curriculum, to make them fit the needs of the 21st century. But as important, more important, we need to improve the conditions too many of our children have to deal with in their lives outside the school walls. When their day-to-day lives are more economically and socially stable, children do better in school. If you're looking for a simple fact, that's it. And that's what makes the educational priorities of people like Obama and other Democrats so frustrating to me. They've bought into the simplistic conservative explanations in their well-meaning attempts, and I think they're well-meaning, to fix our schools, to get rid of failing schools and create great schools. They believe we can somehow, they perpetuate the myth that we can somehow magically make our schools better and everything else will magically fix itself.
Well, I agree with you, Dave, that this has been one of the major disappointments of the Obama administration, that he and his Secretary of Education have not seen through a lot of the myths that are out there. And you would think that someone who had been an organizer in a poor section of Chicago would completely understand the role that poverty plays in creating educational outcomes, and that schools are, can do what they can do, but they are not the panacea to fixing all social problems. And if we don't go to the heart of the issue, then we're never going to solve the underlying problem. And I think a lot of these reformers have done is they have sold the American people a bill of goods. And it's very disappointing to see, smart people like the president and, others buy into that and not question it more. I think, the only thing I can say that Obama did that was productive in his administration for public education was the stimulus package, because it saved us from completely going off the cliff. But the policies of Arne Duncan have been a disaster.
Well, we know that Obama and the Obama administration, Democrats in general, believe in social programs. It's not that they don't. But the problem is that they're giving credence to this basic lie that, well, within the education reform movement, there are some very bad, very selfish actors who are in it for bad reasons. And there are other people who, very much like Obama and other Democrats, honestly believe that this is the way to do things. And I think they've been seduced by the easy answers, because easy answers, politicians love easy answers because it gets them off the hook. They don't have to talk about some of the complex factors I've been talking about here. And because of that, they're allowing this agenda, which isn't going to do what they say it's going to do, to supplant their agenda, which is we need to deal with the primary issues of poverty and income equality in this country.
Well, what we need, instead of a war on teachers and a war on education, is we need to revive the war on poverty, because we didn't win it, we've lost it, and things are getting much worse rather than better.
Yeah, We've got to move in the right directions and keep on working on education. I'm not saying we've got to stay still. We certainly don't have a status quo that is acceptable, but we don't throw out the whole system. This is a wonderful system of public education that will continue to serve us well if we nurture it.
I agree.